Welcome to this lecture on care for community practicing graceful presence through hospitality. Let's review from last lecture where we were talking about power and care for community. And if you recall, I said that to be successful in our communities, and by that I mean that each person has the real opportunity to come to feel safe, secure, respected, and free. So to accomplish that, each of us must be willing to limit or constrain our own freedom in pursuing personal and individual desires in order to cooperate with others. I suggested that what can help is if we develop the attitude of the monkey rope from the Herman Melville's story Moby Dick. That figurative monkey rope idea that our futures are shared in our communities, and what happens to one will happen to all of us. That's a helpful idea, right? That attitude. But what is necessary to be successful in our communities, in fact, just what we actually do in our communities, is we have to exercise power to get others to cooperate with us. And what we want to learn in care for community is how to exercise power in an ethical way. So if you recall, we talked about the three different ways we might influence someone to cooperate with us. So we have coercive power, where we use threats or force or threats of force. People cooperate out of fear. We might have short-term success, but in the long run, it creates apathy, anger, resentment, and of course is unsustainable. We might exercise power in a manipulative way with deception or trickery, dishonesty, and people might cooperate because they're ignorant of the truth, because we've lied to them. Again, we might get short-term success if we lie to someone. They might do what we want. But when they find out that we have been untruthful, of course, long-term result is loss of trust and so on. So it's not sustainable either. And I argue that the only real ethical way of exercising power is persuasive, right? Through appealing to logos, pathos, and ethos. And of course, we know what those are. That means, if I pull these up, logos is we give them reasons for why they should cooperate with us, real, genuine reasons. Pathos is we appeal to emotion. In this sense, it means we listen to them. We hear their concerns, their feelings. And then ethos, we're trustworthy so they can believe us, they can trust us. And of course, if we use persuasion, they cooperate out of respect of our character and competence. Though this might take longer, it builds trust and it's sustainable. So persuasive power is the ethical use of power. I'm not saying that there aren't times when coercion and manipulation might be required, but our default should not be coercion or manipulation. We should always strive for the persuasive use of power. And in fact, if you think about what we've said here, right? Oops, I'll go back to that slide. It's also a very practical idea. I mean, to exercise power, as I said, is to be able to influence others to cooperate with us. I mean, just think of all the times throughout your day when you try to get others to cooperate with you, whether it's, family members or friends or even your professors, your teachers, whether you want to get them, to make you dinner or to take you somewhere or to help you with some task or job or to give you an extension on an assignment, right? We all exercise power. We attempt to influence them to cooperate with us to achieve those ends. But the question to ask yourself, to think about, right, is how do you try to get them to assist you? In other words, how do you exercise power? Are you being coercive? Do you try to use force or threats to get them to do what you want? Do you manipulate? Do you trick or deceive them? Do you lie? Or are you persuasive? Do you respect their basic human dignity? So you, again, use logos, pathos, and ethos. You give them reasons. You listen to their needs and concerns, and you are real and genuine with the other person. I mean, I would recommend that you just try to pay attention, both how you try to influence others and how they try to influence you, and see if you can kind of pick out these different types of power. In fact, just think about our current situation. How are our local, state, and federal governments trying to get us to cooperate with social distancing, to stop the spread of the coronavirus. And what efforts are most successful, right? I mean, are they coercing citizens by force and threats of force? Are they manipulating citizens by not being, honest with us, with citizens? Or are they withholding facts, even outright lying to get us to social distance? Or are they being persuasive, offering, sound scientific reasons, listening to the concerns of the citizens, and then acting in a trustworthy way? Maybe it's a combination of all three ways, but what works, what has worked, what hasn't worked. And in any case, that's just some thoughts for you to think about, to see the relevance of what we're talking about to your life, to understanding your life and what's going on with it. Now, the first challenge in Care for Community is committing to use only persuasive power, in inviting other people to cooperate with you. The second challenge, and perhaps even a bigger one, more difficult one, in Care for Community is dealing with our natural tendency to be too concerned with our relative status in our communities. And the practice of graceful presence here will be the practice to practice hospitality. But let's first, before we get to hospitality, through these slides, talk a bit about the challenge here. And the challenge is that we're status-seeking, reciprocal altruists. And let me introduce it this way. Have you ever noticed that when you're a part of a community, whether it's church-based or school-based or family-based or political-based, or most often perhaps work-based, that we all tend to tell the person above us in power and authority and status what we think they want to hear, and we tend to tell the person beneath us, below us in status, only what we think they need to know. This common, universal behavior is because we as humans, our nature is to be status-seeking, reciprocal altruists. This is a powerful idea to help you understand yourself better. And you can see the definitions if we break this apart. Status-seeking just means that we seek to elevate our position and worth in our group, often as compared to that of others in our group. And reciprocal altruist just means that we cooperate with those who might help us increase our status, and we conflict with those who cannot or will not. And because every one of us is a status-seeking reciprocal altruist, it's a part of the baggage of our evolutionary past. But because of that, every one of us suffer from status anxiety. And there are some consequences of that status anxiety, that worry about our status. And maybe you can see these behaviors in yourself. But we tend to behave differently towards persons of high status. That should be then, not that. Than towards, well, it is then towards persons of low or lower status. We all, if you think about it, right? We all are more polite and deferential to persons above us in status, and we all tend to ignore or dismiss those of lesser or no status. Just reflect on how you feel differently around persons of either high or low status. We all act differently around the company CEO than we would around the receptionist, the lowly receptionist at the front desk. Another consequence is if you are in a high status position, you will tend to act differently than if you were in a low status position, right? Have you ever been promoted in some work position only to realize how you acted differently and how others treated you differently because of the position that you were in? Another consequence, we tend to evaluate our own worth based on our status in our communities. This was really brought home to me once when I was doing some leadership consulting, and I complimented a man for his new promotion to an executive vice president position, and his response kind of portrayed this aspect. He said to me, "Oh, Jeff, I'm not surprised I got the promotion because, like my daddy said, the cream always rises to the top." Anyway, another consequence of our status anxiety is we often rationalize our behavior based on our status or position in our groups or communities. I remember consulting with a senior leader in a company in London, England. I'd been asked to go work with him to try to make him a bit more kind towards his staff, his subordinates. There was high turnover. It was costing the company a lot of money. So I remember so clearly when I went to visit him and I began to explain what my purpose was. And he stopped me and he said, "Oh, Jeff, you just don't get it. You see, my management philosophy is I see my staff like I see light bulbs. I screw them in, turn them on, burn them out, and replace them." Incredible. But here's the problem, right? Since we live in communities where status is the measure of a person's value more often than not, we often act cruelly towards others, as that manager did towards his staff. And we think that this is perfectly okay, right? To treat others below us in status that way. That's just the way things are. Now, to see a more dramatic example of this, I wanted you to read Haley's wonderful essay, From Cruelty to Goodness. And I'm going to assume that you've read that essay. If not, then please stop this video recording, this video lecture right now, and go read that essay on Canvas. So I'm going to assume you've all done that. Let's just pick out a few aspects of that essay, some questions to think about. Again, what is cruelty? Again, it's not just harming or causing pain, but it's wanting to maim, damage, destroy a person's sense of self-worth and human dignity, their very humanity. So cruelty is not just being rude or impolite, even trying to injure the other person, but in cruelty, the intention is to rob them of their very sense of self-respect and dignity. The other question that you perhaps picked out from reading that essay is, what is the difference between episodic and institutionalized cruelty? Well, episodic cruelty is momentary, and both parties recognize its wrongness. So, for instance, if my wife or a family member does something to upset me, and I want to respond in a cruel way, now I know exactly what to do or to say back to that person to make them feel worthless. Right? That's being cruel. Of course, in episodic cruelty like that, we know that we're being cruel. The other person knows that we're acting wrongly, right? But institutionalized cruelty is different, as it says, institutionalized cruelty is normalized, routine, habitual, and all parties think it's simply how things are. It becomes part of our culture, institutionalized cruelty. So, for instance, it might become part of the culture to think that women are inferior to men, right? That's just the way it is, that women should defer to the power of men, or that gays and lesbians and transgender persons are unnatural and so should be changed or punished, right? Again, these are examples of how cruelty can become institutionalized. So both the perpetrator and the victim think it's perfectly normal and natural to be treated this way. So next question. What assumptions are institutionalized cruelty based on, right? So as you can see, the assumption is that of the unequal worth and value of different groups of people, one group is by nature superior and the other group is by nature inferior. So whenever we think that we are superior, either as a group or an individual, to other inferior groups or individuals, then we set the conditions for cruelty to emerge. So what sustains cruelty once you have this disparity in judgments of worth and value? What sustains it are unequal power relationships that determine how the two groups cooperate. So institutionalized cruelty leads us to accept both coercive power and manipulative power from those above us in status as normal and acceptable. I mean, a couple of examples of this sort of structural unequal power relationships that set up cruelty is maybe in a family where the man thinks he is superior to the woman, to tell her exactly what she should do, and the woman comes to accept this and defers to the man's judgment. So in this cruel relationship, they both think it's normal and natural. Another example, maybe in the workplace, where a manager thinks he is superior to his employees, so he can coerce and manipulate them. And the employees think that because of this unequal power relationship, they simply have to submit to the cruelty, through the coercion and manipulation of the person above them in status, right? So this is, again, a problem. Just some examples of where institutionalized cruelty affect most of our communities. But of course, we want to get beyond that to hospitality. But again, to review the conditions for cruelty, one, the assumptions are that some are superior and others are inferior, and it's sustained by the relationships where you have someone in a high power position and others in a low power position. And again, most of our communities are set up to create these conditions for cruelty, hence the importance of hospitality as a practice in care for community. So what is hospitality? The key practice in care for community. So if we come back to Haley's essay, right, we can kind of, get the definition of hospitality, right? Haley says hospitality is unsentimental, efficacious love. Now, by unsentimental, he means it's thoughtful, it's cognitive, it's based on the truth. And by efficacious, Haley means that this kind of love is put into action, it's acted upon. Now, in the essay itself, he tells this wonderful story of Les Champagne, which I think really illustrate this kind of unsentimental, efficacious love. In fact, we'll come back to that slide, but here's the excerpt from the story that I think is just fantastic. And so forgive me for reading this, but hopefully you can just feel the way that cruelty gives way to hospitality in this short excerpt. It says, and I quote, and this is Haley talking, "But for me as a student of cruelty, they were something more." These are the people in Les Champagne. "They were an embodiment of the opposite of cruelty. And so, somehow at last, I had found goodness in opposition to cruelty. In studying their story and in telling it in Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed, I learned that the opposite of cruelty is not simply freedom from the cruel relationship. It is hospitality. It lies not only in something negative, an absence of cruelty or of imbalance. No, it lies in unsentimental, efficacious love." And now the story. One afternoon, a refugee woman knocked on the door of a farmhouse outside the village. The farmers around the village proper were Protestants, like most of the others in Les Champagne, but with one difference. They were mostly Darpsties, followers of a strange Scot named Darby, who taught their ancestors in the 19th century to believe every word of the Bible, and indeed who had them memorize the Bible. They were literal fundamentalists. The farm woman opened the door to the refugee and invited her into the kitchen, where it was warm. Standing in the middle of the floor, the refugee, in heavily accented French, asked for eggs for her children. In those days of very short supplies, people with children often went to the farmers in the gray market, neither black nor exactly legal, to get necessary food. This was early in 1941, and the farmers were not yet accustomed to the refugees. The farm woman looked into the eyes of the shawled refugee and asked, "Are you Jewish?" The woman started to tremble, but she could not lie, even though that question was usually the beginning of the end of life for Jews in Hitler's fortress Europe. She answered yes. The farm woman ran from the kitchen to the staircase nearby, and while the refugee woman trembled with terror in the kitchen, she heard the woman call upstairs, "Husband, children, come down, come down. We have in our house at this very moment a representative of the chosen people." We go back to why this exemplifies hospitality, right? It's an example of welcoming, warm generosity, of kindness that lifts the other in their own eyes and restores them to a place of respect. It makes them feel safe, secure, respected, and free to be self-determining. I mean, just imagine if all of us in our communities, instead of demeaning people or treating them as inferior, less important, if we always acted to lift them up, to elevate them in their eyes and the eyes of others. In care for community, we have to replace then status seeking with hospitality. So this notion, right, that a person's worth and value as a person is dependent on their possessing wealth, positions of power, and popularity, that has to be replaced with hospitality. Every human being, regardless of wealth, positions of power, or popularity, is a person of incomparable worth, value, and dignity. And we should esteem them as ourselves. Status seeking, we have to replace this idea that we should flatter and respect persons of high status, and we can ignore or neglect persons of low status. Hospitality says we should respect the equal privilege of each person to speak and the equal and reciprocal obligation of each person to listen, and so to value everyone's privilege to participate in the decision-making that affects their lives. So again, in care for community, we have to replace status seeking with hospitality. Here are just some practical ideas of how to do that, right? Commit to the persuasive exercise of power in our community. Recognize and treat everyone in the community, whoever they are, as persons of equal worth, value, and dignity. It doesn't depend upon their status, their position, their wealth, but on their humanity. 3, esteem all others in the community as equals. You esteem them as you want them to esteem you. 4, no one is denied the opportunity to participate in the decision-making, governing, and leading, affecting their lives and well-being, right? So people are asked to participate, to be involved. And then finally, 5, respect that each person in the community possesses the equal privilege to speak and shares the equal and reciprocal obligation to listen. So, care for community, the practice of hospitality, is both this combination of persuasive power and coming to appreciate and honor the equal and incomparable worth, value, and dignity of every person, every member of our communities. So the access code for this week, actually, quiz 2, week 13 on hospitality, is 0331. Anyway, thank you all again for listening to this lecture, and good luck on the quiz, and we'll talk to you soon.